Hello, everyone. Welcome to SleepSpace. Tonight, we will talk about a subject that lies in the shadowy corners of the human mind, a place where fear, memory, and imagination collide. Tonight, we will explore nightmares, those unsettling, often terrifying experiences that unfold while we rest. They jolt us awake, hearts racing, skin clammy, minds flooded with images that feel far too real to dismiss as just a dream. But what exactly are nightmares? Why do they happen? And what purpose could fear possibly serve when we are at our most vulnerable? Nightmares have been with us for as long as human beings have existed. Across time and culture, people have spoken of the strange, vivid, and disturbing visions that grip them in the dark. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets carried stories of dreams sent by gods as warnings. The Greeks believed nightmares were delivered by figures like Morpheus, a god of dreams who could shape himself into human form, slipping silently into our sleeping minds. Medieval Europe spun tales of evil spirits called night hags, who would sit on the chest of sleepers, suffocating them and filling their minds with terror. In Asia, Africa, the Americas, everywhere, we find traditions that grapple with the same phenomenon. These stories differ in detail, but at their heart, they all acknowledge the same haunting truth. The human mind is capable of creating fear so powerful that it feels indistinguishable from reality. Science has given us a different lens. Today, we know that the brain does not go silent during rest. Far from it. Neural activity continues in vivid and complex patterns. The body slows down, but the mind remains active, reorganizing information, rehearsing experiences, and sparking imagination. During certain stages of this cycle, particularly REM, rapid eye movement, our brains become highly active, and this is when the most vivid dreams take place. Most of those dreams pass without consequence, sometimes curious, sometimes delightful, sometimes strange. But every so often, the brain stages something far more dramatic, the nightmare. Picture this moment. You are standing in a dimly lit street. You hear footsteps behind you, quickening, drawing closer. You turn, and though the figure remains hidden in shadow, you know instinctively that you are in danger. Your pulse surges, your breath sharpens, you break into a run, yet no matter how fast you move, the sound follows. The sense of dread grows unbearable until suddenly you wake. The room is still. Your heart pounds, your hands tremble, and the fear lingers long after the vision fades. This scenario is familiar to millions. The images vary, but the emotional impact is the same. Deep unease, sometimes terror, powerful enough to disrupt our rest. To understand why, we need to look closely at fear itself. Fear is one of the oldest and most vital survival mechanisms in all of biology. Long before humans roamed the earth, creatures of every shape and size relied on it to survive. A bird startled by the shadow of a hawk reacts instantly, fleeing before thought can intervene. A deer's ears prick at the sound of a twig snapping in the forest, body tensed to flee. This ancient alarm system is embedded in the very architecture of the brain, concentrated in a small but powerful structure called the amygdala. The amygdala processes threats rapidly, faster than conscious thought. It triggers the release of adrenaline, quickens the heartbeat, sharpens the senses, and prepares the muscles for fight or flight. It is this system that nightmares activate, even though the danger is imagined. In that moment, the brain cannot tell the difference between the shadow in the mind and the predator in the forest. To the nervous system, both are real, and that is why the experience is so overwhelming. But here's the deeper question. Why would evolution design a brain that creates threats where none exist? Wouldn't this be a cruel trick? On the surface, perhaps. But researchers have proposed something remarkable, that nightmares are not simply accidents, but simulations. This idea, known as the threat simulation theory, suggests that the brain uses these fearful experiences as a kind of rehearsal. By running scenarios of danger, even exaggerated ones, the mind trains itself to respond. It's like a fire drill, unsettling but valuable. Think of our ancestors on the open plains. The rustle of grass might mean a predator is near. The ones whose minds were quick to anticipate danger, who could even rehearse fear in their resting minds, were the ones more likely to survive. Those who ignored fear, or who were unprepared when true danger came, often did not. And so, across countless generations, the capacity for fear-filled visions was preserved, woven deep into our very biology. When you dream of running from a pursuer or falling from a cliff, your brain may be testing your reactions, ensuring that you are always ready for the unexpected. Of course, not every nightmare is directly tied to survival in the wild. The threats we face have changed, and so have the fears our brains conjure. Today, people often report visions of being unprepared for an exam, of losing control of a vehicle, of failing in front of others. These are not predators lurking in tall grass, but they strike at vulnerabilities that matter in our modern world. Fear of failure, loss of status, danger in unfamiliar environments. The brain adapts its stage, writing new scripts from ancient instincts. And then there are the nightmares born of trauma. For those who have lived through violence, disaster, or profound loss, the mind often replays those moments in vivid, painful detail. This is especially true for conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder. In these cases, the simulation does not feel like a rehearsal. It feels like a repetition, a wound reopened again and again. The purpose may still be the brain's attempt to process and integrate the experience, but instead of resolution, the result is suffering. Nightmares become a prison, locking the dreamer in cycles of fear. Yet even here, science finds meaning. Studies show that confronting these visions, whether through therapy, writing, or even guided dream rehearsal techniques, can sometimes lessen their power. The very fact that nightmares are malleable, that they can change with intention, suggests that they are not meaningless noise. They are signals, expressions of the deepest layers of our minds, raw and unfiltered. What makes them so striking is their creativity. Nightmares often blend the familiar with the impossible. A hallway from childhood becomes endless. A stranger's face morphs into that of a loved one. A simple chase turns into an epic battle with something beyond description. They take fragments of memory, emotion, and imagination and weave them into something that feels both alien and personal. In this way, nightmares resemble stories, primal, emotional stories that the brain tells itself in its most vulnerable state. And this is why nightmares have inspired art and myth for centuries. The painter Henry Fuseli's famous work, The Nightmare, depicts a sleeping woman draped dramatically across her bed, an impish creature crouched on her chest, a horse's ghostly head peering through the shadows. The image captures both the terror and the mystery of these experiences. Writers, too, have drawn from their darker visions. Mary Shelley once recounted that the idea for Frankenstein came after a vivid and disturbing vision while she rested. For her, as for many artists, the line between dream and nightmare was the spark of creation. But the influence extends beyond art. Entire cultures have explained their fears through these nocturnal visions. In Scandinavian folklore, the word mare described a spirit that pressed down on sleepers, suffocating them. From this, we get the word nightmare. In some African traditions, bad dreams are seen as warnings from ancestors. In Native American traditions, dream catchers were believed to filter visions. trapping harmful ones while letting benign or helpful dreams pass through. These beliefs, varied as they are, all reflect a single recognition that the mind in the night is powerful, mysterious, and not always gentle. So, why do some people experience nightmares more often than others? Research points to several factors. Stress, unsurprisingly, plays a major role. When the body is under constant tension, the mind mirrors it in its nightly theatre. Certain medications can heighten brain activity, leading to more vivid visions. Genetics also play a role. Some families seem more prone to intense dreams. And of course, personality matters. Those who are more imaginative, more emotionally sensitive, often report more frequent nightmares. It is as though the same gift that fuels creativity also fuels darkness. Yet even with all this science, there is still mystery. Why one night brings peace and another brings terror. Why some visions fade instantly while others linger for decades. These questions remain only partly answered. The brain is not a simple machine, but a living network, constantly shifting, adapting, surprising, and nightmares are among its most enigmatic creations. So, as we begin our exploration, hold on to this thought. Nightmares are not accidents. They are woven from fear, yes, but also from imagination, memory, and survival. They connect us to our ancestors, to our biology, to our culture, and to our own unspoken emotions. They unsettle us, but they also reveal us. And in the unsettling, there is something strangely profound. When you next awaken from one, shaken by what your mind has conjured, remember this. The vision may not be random. It may be a message, a rehearsal, or even a strange kind of gift. Because when the brain dares to create fear in the stillness of night, it is not betraying us. It is showing us what it means to be human, fragile, imaginative, endlessly adapting. The stage for nightmares is not built from shadows and monsters, but from something far more remarkable, the workings of the human brain. To understand how fear takes hold in these night visions, we have to step inside the machinery of thought, memory, and imagination, and see how the mind transforms sparks of neural activity into entire worlds. At the heart of it all is a cycle. Our nights are divided into distinct phases, each with its own purpose. The light dozing stage, where we drift in and out of awareness. The deeper stages, where the body repairs itself and energy is restored. And then, most dramatically, rapid eye movement, REM, the stage in which the brain becomes almost as active as it is during waking life. It is here that the most vivid, emotional dreams are born. During REM, the brain does something unusual. It disconnects from the outside world. The muscles are paralyzed, a safeguard against acting out visions. The senses are muted so that the room's shadows and sounds do not intrude too strongly. But inside the skull, neurons fire in chaotic bursts. The limbic system, the emotional core of the brain, surges with activity. The amygdala, that tiny almond-shaped structure responsible for fear, flares brightly. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with rational thought, logic, and self-control, goes quiet. The result is a perfect storm, heightened emotion without the calming hand of reason. Fear surges unchecked, and the brain paints it into vivid scenes. This is why nightmares often feel overwhelming. During the day, fear has limits. If you hear a noise behind you, your rational mind quickly assesses whether it's a threat. At night, in the theatre of REM, that filter is muted. A whisper becomes a scream. A shadow becomes a pursuer. The ordinary becomes terrifying. The stage is set for fear to take over, unchallenged. And yet, even in this chaotic environment, there is method. The brain is not simply throwing images randomly. It is weaving them from fragments of memory, emotion, and imagination. A conversation overheard in the day may appear in distorted form. A worry about tomorrow's tasks might become a symbolic disaster. A lingering sense of guilt or shame might emerge as a haunting figure. Nightmares, for all their strangeness, are stitched from the fabric of our waking lives, though rearranged and exaggerated beyond recognition. Consider the experience of falling. Many people report dreams of plummeting from great heights, the wind rushing past, the ground racing upward. Why falling? Some scientists believe it ties back to ancient instincts, the danger of losing footing, of being exposed on high cliffs or trees, dangers our ancestors faced often. Others think it is symbolic of loss of control, a reflection of anxieties in waking life. What makes the nightmare so effective is the body's response. Even though there is no cliff, the inner ear reacts as though there is motion, and the body jerks awake with a start. The illusion is complete. Another common vision is the chase. Someone or something is after you, and no matter how fast you run, you cannot escape. This taps directly into primal fear. Predators once stalked humans relentlessly, and the terror of pursuit is etched deeply into our nervous systems. But today, the pursuer may take many forms: a faceless stranger, a twisted figure, or even a person you know. Often, the pursuer is symbolic, representing a problem you cannot escape, a responsibility that looms, a memory that haunts. The brain dresses it in terrifying costume, but the essence is the same. You are running from something you fear to face, and then there is paralysis. Many people describe visions where they are unable to move, pinned down by an unseen force, struggling to breathe. This is perhaps one of the most disturbing forms of nightmare, and its roots lie in biology. During REM, the body is naturally paralyzed, a safety mechanism to prevent us from acting out dreams. But sometimes the brain wakes before the body does. For a brief, terrifying moment, awareness returns, but the body remains frozen. The mind, caught in this liminal state, often fills the void with images, shadowy figures, presences in the room, sensations of weight on the chest. Across cultures, this has been interpreted as demons, spirits, or intruders. But in reality, it is the brain misfiring, blending waking awareness with the remnants of a dream. These experiences show us just how easily the brain's wiring can blur the lines between real and imagined. What makes nightmares so convincing is that the same systems used for real perception are engaged. When you dream of running, the motor cortex lights up as though you were moving. When you dream of fear, the amygdala reacts as though the danger is present. Your heartbeat races, your breathing quickens. The body responds not to imagination, but to signals indistinguishable from reality. That is why you wake trembling, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. The body has lived through a threat, even though the threat existed only within. But this raises a fascinating point. If nightmares can trick the body so completely, what does that say about the relationship between mind and reality? In waking life, we rely on perception to guide us. Yet nightmares reveal how perception itself can be fabricated. The brain does not need the world to create experience. It can summon entire landscapes, entire narratives, entire terrors, using only itself. And in that sense, nightmares are a humbling reminder. What we call reality is filtered entirely through the fragile machinery of the mind. Not all nightmares strike with equal force. For some, they are rare, occasional intrusions. For others, they come night after night. Recurring nightmares are particularly haunting. A soldier reliving battle, a survivor replaying an accident, a child imagining the same monster again and again. The repetition is not coincidence. It is the brain stuck in a loop, unable to resolve what it is processing. Each replay is an attempt to work through the unresolved emotion or trauma, yet the attempt fails, and so it begins again. Still, within this repetition lies meaning. Therapists often encourage patients to revisit their recurring visions, to rewrite them while awake. A person plagued by a nightmare of being chased might imagine themselves turning to confront the pursuer or finding a hidden door to safety. Over time, the nightmare may shift, its grip weakened. This technique, called imagery rehearsal therapy, shows that the content of nightmares is not fixed. It is fluid, shaped by mind and will. If nightmares reveal the power of fear, they also reveal the power of imagination to confront fear. But there is another subtler kind of nightmare, one that does not scream with monsters or chases, but whispers with unease. A dream in which everything feels slightly wrong. A familiar house where doors will not open. A conversation where words make no sense. A room filled with people who turn silently to stare. These nightmares disturb not by threat, but by dissonance. They unsettle the foundations of what feels normal. Some psychologists believe these visions reflect anxieties that are less direct, more existential, fears of isolation, of insignificance, of the uncanny. They remind us that not all fear is about survival in the physical sense. Some of it is about survival in the emotional, social, and even spiritual sense. So where do nightmares come from? They come from the amygdala, sparking with emotion, from the hippocampus, pulling fragments of memory, from the visual cortex, painting images, from the imagination, stitching it all together into stories. They come from evolution, from culture, from the personal fears we carry. They are at once universal and intimate, ancient and modern. And what do they want from us? Perhaps nothing more than our attention. A nightmare forces us to confront what we would rather ignore. It surfaces the hidden, exaggerates the suppressed, dramatizes the unspoken, and in doing so, it leaves us shaken but also sometimes strangely enlightened. Because in the end, the monsters we run from in the dark are often shadows of ourselves. For as long as humans have looked into the night sky and wondered about the mysteries of existence, they have also looked inward, toward the mysteries of the mind. Nightmares, with their ability to shake the soul, have always demanded explanation. Long before the language of science, cultures across the world crafted stories to make sense of them. And these stories, though varied, share a striking truth. Nightmares have always been understood as more than just dreams. They have been omens, punishments, spiritual invasions, even glimpses of hidden worlds. In the ancient world, dreams of all kinds were taken seriously. The Babylonians and Assyrians believed that nightmares carried messages from the gods or warnings of misfortune. Clay tablets dating back over 3,000 years describe rituals designed to protect the dreamer from harmful visions. Priests and diviners studied these dreams carefully, treating them as coded letters from the divine. A terrifying vision might foretell a coming plague or hint at betrayal in the palace. To ignore a nightmare was to risk disaster. The Egyptians, too, believed in the sacred power of dreams. They created elaborate dream books, collections of symbols and their meanings. A nightmare involving falling, for example, might be interpreted as a warning of failure in one's duties. A dream of being pursued could be taken as a sign of enemies plotting in secret. Temples even had special sleep chambers where people sought dreams deliberately, hoping to receive guidance from the gods. But this was a dangerous quest. The line between sacred dream and nightmare was thin, and a troubling vision could mean the gods were displeased. In ancient Greece, nightmares were woven into myth. The Greeks personified dreams through the oneiroi, a family of spirits. Among them was Morpheus, who shaped dreams in the form of humans. But darker than Morpheus was Phobetor, who brought visions of beasts and terrors. For the Greeks, a nightmare was not just a flicker of the mind, but the visit of a spirit, an intruder from another realm. Homer, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, described dreams that stirred warriors with dread or spurred them into reckless action. To dream of loss or danger was to glimpse a truth beyond the ordinary, one that could not be dismissed. The Romans inherited these beliefs, but added their own interpretations. Nightmares were seen as omens that could shape the destiny of empires. Julius Caesar is said to have paid careful attention to troubling visions, and even the Emperor Augustus sought interpretations from dream readers. For them, fear in the night was a warning system, not to be ignored. The seriousness with which these leaders treated nightmares shows their power. The visions of a single man in bed could influence the decisions of an entire empire. Across Europe in the Middle Ages, nightmares took on a darker, more sinister form. Science and our myth blended uneasily, and what could not be explained was often attributed to spirits or demons. The most enduring of these tales was that of the night hag. According to folklore, a demonic being would sit upon the chest of a sleeper, pressing down with unbearable weight, suffocating them and filling their minds with horrors. People would awaken gasping, paralyzed, certain that something evil had just fled the room. Today, we recognize this as sleep paralysis, a biological phenomenon where the body remains paralyzed while the mind wakes, often accompanied by hallucinations. But to those in the Middle Ages, it was evidence of the supernatural, a nightly visitation from forces of darkness. The very word nightmare reflects this history. In Old English, mare referred not to a horse, but to an evil spirit believed to torment sleepers. The nightmare was a creature of suffocation and fear, a being that preyed on the vulnerable hours of darkness. This belief was not confined to England alone. In Scandinavia, there was the Mara, a malicious spirit who pressed down upon the sleeper's chest. In Germany, similar beings were called the Alp. In Slavic folklore, the Striga and other nocturnal demons were blamed for bad dreams. These myths, spread across so many regions, suggest a common experience. People awoke terrified, paralyzed, unable to move, and sought explanations in spirits that crossed the veil between worlds. In Asia, nightmares were also deeply woven into culture. In Japan, the concept of kanashibari described the terrifying experience of waking paralyzed, often accompanied by the sensation of a ghostly presence. Ancient Buddhist texts spoke of Mara, a demon of temptation and fear, who could invade the mind. In Chinese tradition, dreams, both good and bad, were thought to connect the dreamer to the spirit world. Nightmares were warnings, sometimes from ancestors, sometimes from wandering ghosts. Special amulets and rituals were used to ward off these spirits, ensuring that rest remained undisturbed. Across Africa too, nightmares held cultural weight. In many traditions, they were understood as messages from the spiritual realm. Among some West African groups, bad dreams were believed to be caused by witchcraft or malevolent spirits, but others saw them as ancestral warnings, a call to pay attention to neglected duties, or a sign that harmony within the community had been broken. Dreams were not private experiences, but shared messages that could affect an entire family or village. Among indigenous peoples of the Americas, nightmares were also seen as powerful messages. The Ojibwe, for example, created dream catchers, woven talismans meant to filter visions. According to tradition, the web would trap harmful dreams, letting only safe and meaningful ones pass through to the sleeper. This symbol has become widespread today, often misunderstood as decoration, but originally it was a spiritual tool to protect against the shadows of the night. These stories, scattered across geography and time, reveal a truth about nightmares. They are universal. Though the interpretations differ, gods, spirits, demons, ancestors, every culture has felt the need to explain why the mind creates fear in the dark. And always, the explanations reveal as much about the culture as they do about the visions themselves. In societies that revered gods, nightmares were divine messages. In those that feared spirits, they were hauntings. In those focused on community, they were warnings of imbalance. But beyond belief, nightmares also carried weight in practice. They influenced decisions, shaped rituals, and inspired art. In medieval Europe, a person plagued by night terrors might seek the help of priests, who would bless the bedroom with holy water or recite prayers to drive away spirits. In ancient Egypt, one might consult a dream book and make offerings to appease the gods. In Japan, charms were hung by bedsides to ward off ghosts. These practices reflect not only the fear of nightmares, but also the power attributed to them. If they could terrify, they could also guide. Even today, traces of these beliefs linger. People still speak of bad vibes in certain dreams, of visions that feel like warnings, of loved ones appearing in the night with messages. Rational or not, the sense that nightmares connect us to something beyond ourselves persists. It may be less about spirits or gods now, and more about the subconscious mind, but the awe remains. To wake from a nightmare is to feel that you have touched something larger than ordinary thought. And perhaps that awe is justified, because whether framed as myth, religion, or psychology, nightmares do carry meaning. They reveal the inner conflicts of the dreamer, the hidden fears, the unresolved struggles. They connect us to the raw, primal language of the mind, a language of symbols, stories, and emotions too powerful to remain buried. Think of the figure that chases you in a nightmare. In ancient Greece, it might have been seen as a literal spirit. In the Middle Ages, a demon. In modern psychology, perhaps a reflection of your own avoidance, a part of yourself you are running from. Different interpretations, yet the same image: pursuit, danger, fear. Nightmares hold up a mirror, and each age interprets the reflection according to its beliefs. The stories we've told about nightmares over millennia remind us that humans are storytellers even in their most private moments. Faced with fear in the night, we reach for meaning. And in doing so, we transform private terror into shared culture. The nightmare becomes not just an isolated event in the mind, but a thread woven into the tapestry of human history. For centuries, nightmares were explained through spirits, gods, or demons. They were omens and curses, punishments and warnings. But as the world entered new ages of thought, reason began to challenge superstition. Scholars, physicians, and eventually psychologists started to ask, what if nightmares are not external at all? What if they come not from the outside world, but from within us? The shift began slowly, in an era where science and mysticism often walked side by side. During the Renaissance, medicine was advancing, but belief in supernatural forces remained strong. Physicians noticed that certain foods, heavy meals before bed, or even particular illnesses seemed to bring troubling dreams. They began to suspect that the body itself, the state of digestion, the quality of the blood, the balance of the humours, could affect what the mind experienced at night. The nightmare, once seen as a demon pressing down on the chest, began to be described in medical terms: indigestion, fevers, an excess of melancholy. The language of spirit started giving way to the language of the body. By the 18th century, this medical perspective grew stronger. Physicians describe nightmares as products of physical conditions. A heavy meal might cause a restless night. Alcohol or strong emotions could stir disturbing visions. The idea of the night hag or Mara persisted among the public, but doctors increasingly dismissed it as superstition. The nightmare, they argued, was not a spiritual invasion, but a bodily reaction, and yet the mystery was not fully solved. Why should digestion or illness create visions of terror of all things? That question remained unanswered. It wasn't until the 19th century that the nightmare began to be explored more deeply as a psychological phenomenon. This was the age when the human mind itself became the subject of study. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, revolutionized the way people thought about dreams, and nightmares in particular. For Freud, dreams were not random, nor were they divine messages. They were windows into the unconscious, the hidden reservoir of desires, fears, and memories that shaped behavior. Freud believed that nightmares revealed conflicts within the psyche. Where ordinary dreams might disguise forbidden wishes in symbolic form, nightmares tore through the disguise, confronting the dreamer with what they feared most. A terrifying dream of being chased might, in his view, represent repressed anxiety or guilt. A disturbing vision of death might symbolize hidden fears about mortality or loss. Nightmares, Freud argued, were the return of the repressed, the parts of ourselves we try hardest to hide, forcing their way into awareness when our guard is down. Freud's theories were controversial, and not all accepted them, but his ideas changed the conversation forever. No longer were nightmares seen only as products of food or illness. They became psychological events tied to the deepest layers of the human mind. Others expanded on this perspective. Carl Jung, once Freud's student and later his rival, had his own interpretation. For Jung, nightmares were not simply expressions of repressed fears, they were messages from the unconscious designed to guide us. He believed the psyche sought balance, and that dreams, even frightening ones, were a way of correcting imbalance in the mind. A nightmare, in this view, was not an enemy but a teacher, revealing truths that the conscious self ignored. Jung also believed that many nightmares drew upon what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypes and symbols inherited across humanity. The monsters, shadows, and dark figures that appear in dreams were, in his view, expressions of universal patterns, reminders of our shared human journey. By the 20th century, psychology and neuroscience joined forces to investigate nightmares in more concrete ways. With the discovery of REM sleep in the 1950s, scientists were able to track the stages of the night in unprecedented detail. Electroencephalograms revealed bursts of brain activity during dreaming. Researchers noticed that when sleepers were awakened during REM, they often reported vivid dreams and sometimes nightmares. The connection between brain activity and dream content became undeniable. Studies showed that nightmares were more likely to occur during certain stages of REM, particularly when the brain was most active in emotional centers. This aligned with what people already knew anecdotally. Nightmares feel overwhelmingly emotional. The science confirmed that the amygdala, hippocampus, and other emotion processing regions light up during nightmares, while the rational, logical prefrontal cortex stays quiet. It was as though the brain, unrestrained by reason, allowed fear to run wild. But science also revealed something more complex. Nightmares, researchers discovered, were not simply random explosions of fear. They often followed patterns linked to waking life. A stressful day increased the likelihood of disturbing dreams. Trauma, grief, and anxiety were strong predictors of recurring nightmares. Even anticipation, such as the stress of an upcoming exam or performance, could stir unsettling visions. The connection between waking stress and nocturnal terror was too strong to ignore. This led researchers to a profound conclusion. Nightmares are part of how the brain processes emotion. When we experience something stressful or traumatic, the brain replays it during dreams, perhaps as a way of working through the emotion. Sometimes this is successful. The dream helps us integrate the memory and reduce its emotional power. But sometimes it fails, and instead of resolution, the nightmare repeats, a wound reopening again and again. This understanding laid the groundwork for therapies that address nightmares directly. Psychologists realized that helping people change their nightmares by rewriting them, confronting them, or reframing their meaning could reduce their frequency and intensity. Suddenly, nightmares were not just curiosities of the mind, but treatable phenomena. They became a subject of clinical study, linked to mental health conditions like PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Yet, even as science advanced, the cultural fascination with nightmares never disappeared. Artists continued to explore them. Filmmakers brought them to life on the screen, and writers used them as metaphors for inner conflict. The nightmare remained as much a subject of art and imagination as of science and medicine. This duality, nightmares as both biological phenomena and cultural symbols, makes them uniquely human. Consider how, in the modern era, nightmares often take new forms. Where ancient people dreamed of demons or gods, today's dreamers often report visions of technology, accidents, social humiliation, or global disasters. Our nightmares evolve with our world, reflecting the anxieties of the time. A villager in medieval Europe might dream of witches or plagues. A person today might dream of plane crashes or nuclear explosions. Different imagery, same purpose, the dramatization of fear. And yet beneath these differences lies continuity. The fear of loss, the fear of failure, the fear of death, these remain unchanged. The stage and costumes shift, but the core of the nightmare remains eternal. In this sense, nightmares connect us across time and culture, from the ancient scribe recording dreams on clay tablets to the modern patient hooked up to a sleep monitor. The evolution of how we've understood nightmares, from demons to digestion, from repressed desires to neural activity, tells us something larger. It shows that humanity has always been compelled to make sense of its fears. When confronted with something that feels real but comes from within, we demand explanation. First, we turn to gods, then to spirits, then to psychology, and finally to neuroscience. Each step brought us closer to understanding, but the fascination never faded. And perhaps that's the most telling thing. Even with brain scans, data, and therapy, nightmares retain their mystery. We may know which parts of the brain are active, but why certain images appear, why certain fears resurface, why one person dreams of falling while another dreams of being chased. These questions remain. Science has explained the mechanics, but the meaning continues to elude. And it is in that tension between what we know and what we still wonder that nightmares continue to grip us. At the heart of every nightmare lies a story of emotion. Not random emotion, not fleeting fear, but something deeper. A residue of memory, a shadow of experience, a scar that refuses to fade. To understand why nightmares exist, we must look not only at the brain as a machine of neurons and chemicals, but at the brain as the keeper of memory and emotion. Because nightmares, at their essence, are emotional memories made flesh in the theatre of dreams. The connection between nightmares and trauma is one of the most powerful in all of psychology. When the body experiences trauma, a violent accident, the horrors of war, abuse, disaster, loss, the memory is not stored in the same way as an ordinary event. The brain's amygdala, its fear center, floods with activity. Stress hormones surge. Instead of being neatly filed away, the memory lingers like a raw wound, jagged and unprocessed. At night, when the mind slips into the dreaming state, these wounds often resurface, demanding attention. The result is the trauma nightmare, vivid, repetitive, and filled with the same terror felt during the event itself. Soldiers returning from battle often describe the same experience, waking drenched in sweat, heart racing after reliving combat in dreams. Survivors of accidents or assaults speak of the same. Night after night, the mind drags them back into the moment they most want to forget. These are not symbolic dreams. They are literal replays, often nearly identical to the memory. Science suggests that the brain is attempting again and again to process the trauma, to move it from the realm of raw emotion into the calmer territory of narrative memory. But in many cases, it fails. The trauma is too overwhelming, too seared into the body's systems, and so it cycles endlessly, haunting the dreamer. Even outside of trauma, nightmares are tightly bound to emotional experience. Stress, grief, heartbreak, and anxiety all leave their imprint on the dreaming mind. Think of the way fear of failure appears in the classic nightmare of arriving unprepared for an exam, or standing before a crowd without words, or how grief seeps into visions of lost loved ones, where the dreamer wakes both comforted and devastated. Nightmares are emotional amplifiers. They take the quiet whispers of waking worry and turn them into thunder. Why does the brain do this? Why revisit the very emotions that cause pain? Neuroscience offers one answer. The brain is trying to regulate emotion. During REM sleep, the amygdala is highly active, but stress hormones like norepinephrine drop to unusually low levels. This creates a unique state in which the brain can re-experience emotions in a safer environment. It's as if the mind is running simulations of fear, anger, or grief, but with the volume turned down, an opportunity to process them without the overwhelming chemical storm of waking life. But when nightmares persist, this system seems to break down. Instead of calming the emotions, the dream amplifies them. The sleeper wakes in terror, stress hormones spiking, the emotion unresolved. Scientists describe this as a malfunction of emotional processing. The brain gets caught in a loop, replaying the same images and feelings without resolution. In this way, nightmares can become both symptom and cause. They emerge from emotional pain, and in turn, they intensify it. Consider also how nightmares weave in memory fragments. The brain does not replay trauma or stress in perfect order. Instead, it takes shards of experience, a sound, a face, a location, and stitches them into new but haunting forms. Someone who has lost a loved one may not dream of the death itself, but of endless searching, or of being left behind in a crowd. A person with social anxiety may not dream of a specific event, but of being chased, mocked, or humiliated. The nightmare becomes a metaphor, translating raw emotion into dramatic storylines. This is why nightmares are so deeply personal. Even if two people report similar themes, the details are shaped by their unique lives and fears. And yet, amid this personal detail, universal patterns emerge. Being chased, falling, failing, losing someone, being trapped. These are among the most common nightmares reported across cultures. Why? Because they reflect universal human fears. The fear of danger, the fear of losing control, the fear of death, the fear of failure. In this way, nightmares are both individual and collective, private scripts written with universal ink. One of the most haunting qualities of nightmares is their persistence. Unlike ordinary dreams, which fade quickly upon waking, nightmares often linger. The images cling to the mind, the emotions bleed into the day. This is partly because of the intensity of the amygdala's activation during the nightmare. Fear imprints memory, but it is also because nightmares connect directly to unresolved emotional themes. They demand attention. They whisper or scream. Something within you has not been faced. Therapists who work with nightmare sufferers often describe a turning point, when the dreamer stops seeing the nightmare as pure torment and begins to treat it as communication. By asking, "What is this nightmare trying to tell me? What fear, grief, or conflict is it expressing?" The dreamer shifts from victim to participant. In this way, nightmares can be transformed from wounds into guides. The very emotions they highlight, once acknowledged, can begin to heal. Of course, not all nightmares are rooted in trauma or stress. Sometimes they arise from more subtle disturbances, changes in medication, irregular sleep patterns, even temperature shifts during the night. But even then, the brain tends to fill the dream with emotional narratives. Fear remains the common denominator. It is as though, when unsettled, the mind instinctively turns to its oldest language, the language of fear. Nightmares also remind us that the emotional brain is not bound by reason. The scenarios that unfold often defy logic. A loved one suddenly becoming a stranger, a familiar house turning into a labyrinth, a pursuer with no face. These distortions are unsettling precisely because they break the rules of waking life. They reveal how deeply the brain values emotion over logic in the dream state. The nightmare does not ask, "Does this make sense?" It asks, "Does this make you feel?" And if the answer is yes, the mission is accomplished. But here lies the paradox. Though nightmares are often painful, they may also serve a purpose. By forcing the dreamer to face fear, they may build resilience. Some scientists argue that nightmares act as a kind of rehearsal, the brain's way of preparing us for danger by simulating it in a safe environment. Much like the way children play out fears in games, the mind may stage its darkest plays in order to make us stronger. To dream of being chased, then, is not just torment, it is practice. The brain is saying, "Here is fear. Learn to face it." Whether seen as symptom, metaphor, or rehearsal, nightmares reveal the profound bond between memory and emotion. They are not random flickers, not meaningless noise. They are emotional dramas staged in the theatre of sleep. And while the actors and sets may change, the script always points back to the same source: the unhealed, the unresolved, the deeply felt. And so, when we speak of nightmares, we are not only speaking of dreams, we are speaking of the mind's attempt to grapple with what it cannot let go of. We are speaking of the unburied past, the hidden fear, the grief that lingers. We are speaking of the human struggle to integrate pain into the story of life. In this way, nightmares are not merely interruptions of rest. They are emotional events, as real and impactful as anything that happens in daylight. And perhaps, when understood in this light, they are not only something to be feared, but something to be listened to, even respected. Because within their darkness lies a truth. The mind never forgets, and it will always find a way to make us remember. When we think of nightmares, we often picture the images: the chase, the fall, the faceless figure in the dark. But behind those visions, hidden from awareness, lies the machinery of the body. Fear does not rise from images alone. It rises from chemistry, from electricity, from the interplay of brain and body. To understand why nightmares feel so powerful, we must look at the biological orchestra that plays them into existence. At the center of this orchestra is REM sleep, the stage on which nightmares most often unfold. During REM, the brain becomes highly active, nearly as active as when awake. The eyes dart beneath closed lids, the heart rate quickens, breathing becomes irregular. It is a paradoxical state. The body is paralyzed, but the brain is alive with energy. Within this paradox, dreams form, and when the conditions are right, so do nightmares. The amygdala, the almond-shaped cluster deep in the brain, is one of the key players. Known as the fear center, the amygdala responds to threats in waking life with lightning speed, triggering the fight or flight response. But during REM sleep, the amygdala remains highly active, even though the body lies still. This activity floods dreams with emotional intensity. When the amygdala fires, fear dominates the stage, and the dream twists into a nightmare. The hippocampus, the brain's memory hub, also joins the performance. During sleep, the hippocampus replays fragments of the day, consolidating them into long-term memory. But trauma, stress, or unresolved emotion can disrupt this process. Instead of smoothly storing memories, the hippocampus becomes stuck, cycling fragments over and over. These fragments often appear in dreams, stitched into bizarre narratives. And when the emotional charge is strong enough, the dream becomes frightening. The prefrontal cortex, the rational overseer of thought, tells a different story. During REM sleep, this part of the brain is unusually quiet. Logic, reason, and impulse control fade. The result is a mind without its usual restraints. Images blend without coherence, fears rise unchecked, and impossible scenarios unfold without question. This is why nightmares can be so surreal yet feel utterly convincing. The part of the brain that would normally say, "This makes no sense," is silent, leaving fear free to rule the stage. But the story of nightmares is not only about brain regions, it is also about chemistry. Neurotransmitters, the brain's messengers, shape the dream world in powerful ways. One of the most important is norepinephrine, a chemical tied to the stress response. In waking life, norepinephrine helps us react to danger, keeping us alert. But during REM sleep, norepinephrine levels drop to almost nothing. This unusual absence is thought to help the brain revisit emotional memories without triggering overwhelming stress. It is the mind's way of creating a rehearsal space for fear. Yet in those who suffer chronic nightmares, particularly after trauma, this system can malfunction. Instead of dropping, norepinephrine remains elevated. The rehearsal space becomes a battlefield. Fear surges too strongly, overwhelming the brain's ability to process it. The dream turns into a relentless replay of terror, and rest becomes impossible. This discovery has even guided treatment. Medications that lower norepinephrine activity during sleep can reduce the intensity of trauma nightmares, allowing the mind to heal. Another chemical at play is serotonin. Often called the mood stabilizer, serotonin levels shift throughout the sleep cycle, influencing both mood and dream content. Low serotonin is associated with depression and anxiety, conditions that also bring more frequent nightmares. Dopamine, too, has a role, adding intensity and vividness to dreams. When dopamine activity surges, dreams become more colorful, more emotional, more immersive, and sometimes more terrifying. Then there is cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol follows a daily rhythm, peaking in the morning to wake us and dropping at night to allow rest. But in times of chronic stress, cortisol levels remain high even during sleep. This disrupts normal cycles, fragments REM, and increases the likelihood of nightmares. It is as though the body's stress never fully turns off, carrying fear into the night. All of these chemicals, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, cortisol, interact with the architecture of sleep itself. Sleep is not a single state, but a cycle of stages. Light sleep, deep sleep, REM. Each plays its role in memory, restoration, and emotional balance. But when the balance is disrupted by stress, trauma, illness, or irregular sleep, the cycle falters. REM becomes unstable, the emotional brain takes over, and nightmares thrive in the cracks. The biology of nightmares also explains why they feel so physical. We wake with pounding heart, quickened breath, even trembling limbs. This is not imagined. It is the body reacting as though the threat were real. During a nightmare, the sympathetic nervous system, which governs fight or flight, is activated. The heart pumps faster, muscles tense, adrenaline flows. Normally, sleep paralyzes the body to prevent acting out dreams. But inside, the body is still bracing for battle. When we wake from a nightmare, that battle-ready state lingers. The fear is not just in the mind, it is coursing through the veins. There is also the phenomenon of sleep paralysis, often intertwined with nightmares. In this state, the mind wakes while the body remains paralyzed. The dream world seeps into waking perception, creating hallucinations of intruders, shadows, or suffocating forces. The biology behind this is simple. The paralysis of REM has not yet lifted, but the experience is anything but simple. It feels real, immediate, terrifying. The body cannot move, the amygdala is firing, and the dream imagery invades consciousness. For centuries, this was explained as demons or night hags. Today, we know it as a glitch in the sleep-wake boundary. Yet even with an explanation, the terror remains profound. The biological roots of nightmares also help explain why they change across the lifespan. Children, for example, experience more nightmares than adults. Their brains are still developing, their emotional regulation systems less mature, and their REM sleep proportionally longer. As they grow, nightmares often decrease, though for some, they persist. In adulthood, stress, trauma, and mental health conditions often bring nightmares back with renewed force. In old age, nightmares may diminish again, though changes in brain chemistry and medications can spark them anew. Even the substances we consume can shape our nightmares. Alcohol, though often thought to aid sleep, disrupts REM. Withdrawal from alcohol brings vivid and disturbing dreams. Caffeine delays sleep and increases restlessness, creating conditions ripe for nightmares. Certain medications, particularly antidepressants and blood pressure drugs, alter neurotransmitter activity and can intensify dream vividness. What we put into our bodies echoes in the theatre of dreams. But perhaps the most fascinating biological insight is that nightmares are not accidents of the system. They may be built into it. The very mechanisms that allow us to process fear and emotion during sleep also make nightmares possible. In this sense, nightmares are not malfunctions, but side effects of a vital process. The emotional brain cannot heal without stirring fear, and sometimes that fear takes the form of terror-filled dreams. The biology of nightmares is therefore not only about dysfunction, but about survival. It is striking to realize that what feels like an attack of the mind is, in truth, the work of systems designed to protect us. The amygdala fires because it is wired to defend us. The hippocampus replays memories to help us learn. Norepinephrine and cortisol surge to prepare us for danger. Even the paralysis of REM keeps us safe from acting out our fears. The nightmare is a distortion of these systems, a moment when protection becomes torment. But the roots lie in the very mechanisms that allow us to endure. So when the body jolts awake from a nightmare, heart racing, lungs gasping, sweat on the skin, what we are feeling is biology at its most primal. We are experiencing the legacy of survival, the ancient wiring that kept our ancestors alive in a world of predators and dangers. The brain has sounded the alarm, the body has prepared for battle, even if the battlefield exists only in dream. This perhaps is the most dramatic truth of all. Nightmares remind us that fear is not only an emotion, it is a biological state. It begins in chemistry, pulses through the nervous system, and rises into the dream world. And when the dream dissolves, the biology remains, echoing in the body, a lingering tremor of survival. When we ask why the brain torments us with fear in the night, there is one answer that looms larger than all the rest: survival. Nightmares, as agonizing as they are, may not exist to hurt us at all. Instead, they may exist to prepare us, to sharpen our instincts, to rehearse our responses, to ensure that we remain alive in a dangerous world. To understand this possibility, we must step back thousands of years, to a time when humans lived not in houses with locked doors, but in open landscapes filled with predators. Imagine a group huddled around a fire, night stretching endlessly beyond the glow, every sound a potential threat. In such a world, the mind could not afford to ignore danger, even while asleep. Fear was not a nuisance, it was a weapon. The evolutionary theory of nightmares suggests that dreams of fear served as practice runs for survival. When the brain conjured an image of being chased, attacked, or trapped, it allowed the dreamer to rehearse responses, to run faster, hide better, fight harder. Though the threat was not real, the emotions were, and through repetition, the mind became more prepared for real dangers. A person who dreamed of the lion might wake better, equipped to face the real thing. This idea is supported by the fact that many of the most common nightmares involve primal fears: pursuit, falling, death, injury, betrayal. These are not trivial worries, they are threats to survival or to belonging, which was equally essential in early human groups. To be excluded, shamed, or abandoned was nearly as dangerous as to be attacked. The nightmare, then, reflects the ancient fears that shaped humanity's evolution. The neuroscientist Antti Revonsuo proposed what he called the threat simulation theory. According to this view, nightmares evolved specifically to simulate threatening situations, allowing the brain to rehearse survival strategies in a safe environment. Just as children play at hunting, fighting, or escaping danger in games, the brain does so in dreams. The difference is that in nightmares, the rehearsal is driven not by choice, but by fear. And fear, as we know, imprints deeply. One of the most compelling arguments for this theory is the universality of nightmares. Across all cultures, across all times, humans report similar themes: being hunted, being attacked, falling, drowning, losing loved ones. Even children who have not yet experienced danger firsthand report such dreams. This suggests that nightmares are not merely the byproducts of personal experience, but may be hardwired into the human brain, echoing the threats faced by our ancestors. Consider the nightmare of falling. Today, it often comes without context, a sudden plunge into nothingness. But in a world of cliffs, treetops, and unstable terrain, falling was a real and constant danger. The dream of falling may once have been a reminder: be careful, hold fast, do not step where the ground is unsure. The nightmare of pursuit may carry the same lesson: always be alert, always know where to run. These fears may feel irrational in modern life, but they are rational in the context of survival. Even social nightmares can be explained in this light. To dream of humiliation, failure, or abandonment may seem trivial compared to being chased by a predator. But in early human societies, belonging was life itself. To be cast out from the tribe meant exposure, starvation, vulnerability. Nightmares of social rejection, then, may be rehearsals for the most vital of survival skills: maintaining bonds, preserving reputation, protecting one's place in the group. Of course, this theory does not mean that every nightmare today serves a useful purpose. The modern world presents dangers of a very different kind: exams, bills, deadlines, broken relationships. Our brains still use the same machinery of fear, but the threats we face are often symbolic, abstract, or exaggerated. Yet the persistence of nightmares suggests that the ancient function remains. The brain continues to train us in the language of fear, even if the enemies have changed. But the evolutionary story of nightmares does not end with practice alone. Some researchers argue that nightmares also served as warnings, not rehearsals for imagined threats, but alerts about real ones. If a person dreamed repeatedly of snakes, perhaps it made them more cautious when stepping through tall grass. If they dreamed of betrayal, perhaps it made them more watchful of rivals in the group. The nightmare could be both simulation and signal, preparing the mind for what might come. There is also evidence from other species that supports this view. Studies of animals show that they too experience REM sleep. Cats twitch, dogs whimper, rats' brains replay maze patterns during dreams. Some researchers believe that animals also experience something like nightmares, vivid replays of threats they have faced. If true, this suggests that fear in dreams is not unique to humans, but a deep-rooted survival tool, shared across the animal kingdom. Yet nightmares are more than just ancient rehearsals. They also reveal something about the way evolution shaped the balance between fear and safety. Too little fear, and the species would not survive. Too much fear, and individuals would be paralyzed, unable to function. Nightmares, with their ability to stir terror in safety, may have been a way to fine-tune that balance. By confronting fear in dreams, humans learned to face it better in life. Of course, in modern times, this ancient system sometimes betrays us. The same nightmares that once trained us now haunt us with unnecessary repetition. Trauma can hijack the system, forcing endless replays that offer no resolution. Anxiety can turn small stresses into nightly terrors. In a world where predators no longer lurk outside the firelight, the threat simulation sometimes misfires. What was once adaptive can become maladaptive, and yet even now there may be hidden benefits. People who report frequent nightmares often show heightened sensitivity to threat in waking life. They may notice dangers more quickly, respond faster, or be more attuned to social tensions. In some cases, this can be protective. The cost is high: restless nights, lingering fear, but the evolutionary logic remains visible. Fear sharpens awareness. There is also the strange paradox that some people deliberately seek nightmares. Horror films, frightening stories, and ghostly legends are popular worldwide. We create safe environments to trigger fear, perhaps tapping into the same mechanism that nightmares use: rehearsal in safety. In this sense, our entertainment mimics evolution, giving us a way to feel fear without true danger. The difference is that in waking life we choose it, in dreams it chooses us. When we step back, the evolutionary perspective transforms how we see nightmares. They are not simply cruel tricks of the mind, nor random malfunctions. They are ancient guardians, remnants of a time when danger was everywhere and fear was the difference between life and death. The nightmare is a rehearsal, a warning, a teacher, even if it teaches through terror. And perhaps this is why nightmares feel so elemental. They touch on the deepest fears, the ones rooted not just in individual lives, but in the long arc of humanity. To fall, to be chased, to be abandoned, these are not modern worries. They are the fears of survival itself. Each nightmare is a whisper from the past, a reminder of the countless generations who survived because they listened to fear. Nightmares do not only haunt us, they also shape us. What terrifies in the night often becomes inspiration in the day. Throughout history, the visions that jolt us awake have not only lingered as private fears, but have spilled outward into art, stories, music, and inventions. The nightmare, in this way, is not only a tormentor, but a muse. Consider the power of imagery that nightmares provide. The bizarre distortions, the haunting figures, the impossible landscapes. These are unlike anything we see in waking life. Dreams are not bound by physics or logic, and nightmares take this freedom further still, bending reality into grotesque, unsettling forms. Artists have long recognized this. To paint, write, or compose from nightmares is to access the raw, unfiltered imagination of the mind, unrestrained by reason. One of the most famous artistic depictions of nightmares is Henry Fuseli's 1781 painting, The Nightmare. It shows a woman sprawled across a bed, limp in sleep, while a demonic figure squats on her chest. From the shadows, a ghostly horse thrusts its head forward, eyes wide and white. The painting captures both the suffocating terror of sleep paralysis and the strange fascination nightmares hold. Viewers of the time were both horrified and enthralled. The work remains iconic today, precisely because it visualizes an experience so many recognize. The weight, the paralysis, the terror that feels otherworldly. But Fuseli was far from alone. The surrealists of the 20th century, such as Salvador Dali, drew upon dream imagery, including the grotesque distortions of nightmares. Melting clocks, fragmented bodies, endless barren landscapes. These feel like the scenery of unsettling dreams. The surrealists understood that the unconscious, with its fears and desires, could fuel art unlike any produced by reason. And nightmares, with their intensity, offered the richest fuel of all. Literature, too, has been shaped by nightmares. Mary Shelley, at just 18 years old, experienced a terrifying dream of a scientist bringing life to a corpse. She awoke shaken, but from that vision came Frankenstein, one of the most influential novels in history. Robert Louis Stevenson dreamt of a man transforming into a monster, a dream that gave birth to the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In both cases, the nightmare was not only a private terror, but a seed of creation. These works, born of fear, went on to influence entire genres of storytelling. Nightmares continue to inspire literature to this day. Horror writers, in particular, often speak of drawing upon their own dreams for material. Stephen King, a master of weaving fear into narrative, has described using his dreams as sources of story ideas. The bizarre, the terrifying, the surreal, all find fertile ground in fiction. Nightmares, in this way, extend beyond the dreamer, shaping the imaginations of millions of readers. Music, too, has been touched by nightmares. Composers across centuries have tried to capture in sound the sense of unease, dread, and terror that nightmares evoke. Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, for example, includes movements inspired by visions and dreams, blending beauty with horror. Modern musicians in genres ranging from classical to rock to electronic continue to use nightmare-inspired sounds. Dissonance, sudden shifts, haunting tones, to evoke the same mix of fear and fascination. Even film owes much to nightmares. The entire genre of horror cinema is, in many ways, an attempt to recreate the nightmare experience. The distortion of reality, the rising dread, the sudden jolt of terror. Directors like David Lynch craft surreal films that feel like nightmares unfolding on screen, while horror classics such as A Nightmare on Elm Street directly use dreams as the setting for terror. Audiences flock to these films, willingly stepping into the world of the nightmare, because they recognize the authenticity of its fear. But nightmares do not only inspire art. At times, they have influenced science and invention as well. History is filled with accounts of discoveries born from dreams. some of them dark and unsettling. Dmitry Mendeleev, the creator of the periodic table, reported that the idea came to him in a dream. The chemist Auguste Kekulé dreamt of a snake biting its own tail, an image that revealed to him the structure of the benzene ring. While not all of these were nightmares in the traditional sense, they demonstrate how dream imagery, often strange, sometimes frightening, can bypass conscious thought and unlock new insights. The link between nightmares and creativity may lie in the very nature of dreaming. In REM sleep, the brain forms unusual connections, blending fragments of memory, emotion, and imagination. Nightmares heighten this process by infusing it with intensity. The fear makes the dream more memorable, the images more vivid, the impact more lasting. What might otherwise be forgotten as a fleeting dream instead burns itself into memory, demanding to be expressed. For the creative mind, this is fertile soil. And perhaps there is something else at work, the human urge to transform fear into meaning. To be haunted by a nightmare is to carry a burden, but to paint it, write it, compose it, or film it is to reclaim control. In turning terror into art, the dreamer shifts from victim to creator. The nightmare becomes not just something endured, but something shaped, retold, and shared. This transformation is more than catharsis, it is connection. When an artist shares a nightmare-inspired work, they reveal a piece of the universal human experience. Viewers, readers, or listeners recognize their own fears in the creation. They say, "Yes, I know that feeling." And in that recognition, private terror becomes collective understanding. The nightmare, which isolates in the moment of fear, becomes a bridge in the realm of art. It is striking to realize how often culture's most powerful works are rooted in fear. The monsters of myth, the Gothic novels, the horror films, the surreal paintings, all echo the imagery of nightmares. Without them, our cultural landscape would be vastly different, perhaps flatter, less textured. Fear, though painful, has given rise to beauty, meaning, and even innovation. And in this lies a paradox worth dwelling on. The nightmare is an experience most of us dread. We resist it, we wake shaken, we long for peace instead. Yet without nightmares, our art, our stories, our very imagination would be poorer. Terror in the night has given us some of humanity's greatest expressions of creativity in the day. The very thing that feels like an enemy is, in truth, also an ally, a dark muse, whispering inspiration through fear. There is something uniquely unsettling about a nightmare that does not happen once, but returns again and again. A single night of terror can be shaken off in the light of day, but when the same vision stalks us repeatedly, it begins to feel like more than just a dream. Recurring nightmares, with their relentless repetition, take fear and transform it into obsession. They dig into the mind, embedding themselves until they feel like part of us. Many people can recall such experiences: the same chase, the same fall, the same faceless figure at the door. Sometimes the details shift slightly, but the theme remains constant. And for those who endure them, the effect is more than just restless sleep. Recurring nightmares bleed into waking life, raising anxiety, disrupting concentration, even causing dread at the very thought of going to bed. Why do nightmares return? One answer lies in unresolved fear. The brain, ever determined to process and resolve emotion, revisits the same imagery in an attempt to work through it. When the fear is too great or the trauma too deep, the resolution never comes, and the nightmare loops endlessly. Each night is another attempt to complete the story, but the ending remains out of reach. Trauma survivors, in particular, often experience recurring nightmares. Soldiers returning from war, victims of accidents, survivors of violence. Many describe dreams that replay the event. sometimes with painful accuracy, sometimes with symbolic distortion. The brain, unable to fully integrate the trauma into memory, repeats it instead. It is as if the mind is stuck in rehearsal, trapped in a cycle of remembering that will not release. But trauma is not the only cause. Even everyday anxieties can fuel recurring dreams. A child worried about school might dream repeatedly of being lost in a maze-like classroom. An adult overwhelmed by work might find themselves nightly chased by an unstoppable force. In these cases, the recurring nightmare reflects not a single event, but an ongoing stress, a pressure that has not yet found resolution in waking life, and so insists on echoing in sleep. The content of recurring nightmares often aligns with common phobias: fear of falling, fear of drowning, fear of being trapped, fear of being chased. These are not random, they are primal terrors, deeply embedded in the human psyche. A person afraid of suffocation may dream again and again of being buried alive. Someone fearful of failure may find themselves endlessly unprepared for a test. The nightmare magnifies the phobia, embodying it with brutal clarity. But the connection between nightmares and mental health runs deeper still. Recurring nightmares are strongly linked with conditions such as anxiety disorders, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. In some cases, they act as early warning signs, an indicator that the mind is struggling long before other symptoms appear. For this reason, psychologists sometimes view nightmares not as mere nuisances, but as signals worth listening to. Consider the way recurring nightmares affect the body. Each time one occurs, the heart races, adrenaline surges, muscles tense. Over time, this repeated stress can take a physical toll, leaving the body in a state of constant readiness, as though danger is never far away. This is why recurring nightmares are not simply nighttime disturbances, but health concerns that ripple outward into every aspect of life. And yet, despite their power, recurring nightmares also reveal something remarkable about the brain. They show us that the mind does not let go of what is unresolved. It continues to circle back, insisting on attention, demanding recognition. The nightmare is not random cruelty, it is persistence. It is the mind saying, "This matters. Do not ignore it." In some traditions, recurring nightmares are seen as messages, warnings, omens, spiritual signs. Across cultures, people have turned to rituals, healers, or symbolic interpretations to explain why the same dream returns. Whether viewed through the lens of psychology or spirituality, the recurrence carries weight. It means something is unresolved, something is calling to be understood. There are ways people attempt to face recurring nightmares. One method is lucid dreaming, where the dreamer becomes aware they are dreaming and attempts to change the narrative. Another is imagery rehearsal therapy, in which a person rewrites the nightmare while awake, creating a new, less frightening ending, and then practices visualizing this version before sleep. These techniques do not always succeed, but when they do, they transform the nightmare from tormentor into teacher. Still, there is something undeniably haunting about the way nightmares repeat. They remind us of how fragile control can be, how powerless we can feel against our own minds. By day, we may project confidence, but by night, when the same terror grips us again and again, we are reminded of the truths we cannot escape. Recurring nightmares also highlight how closely the world of dreams and waking fears are intertwined. Phobias, spiders, heights, suffocation, betrayal bleed into the dream world, give an exaggerated, surreal life. And the nightmare, in turn, strengthens the phobia, making it harder to confront. The cycle deepens as fear feeds fear, both awake and asleep. But perhaps the most profound aspect of recurring nightmares is their ability to reveal hidden truths. What we repress deny, or avoid in daylight often returns at night in distorted form. A recurring nightmare may be a signal that something within us demands acknowledgement. It may not always be literal, the monster may not represent a real enemy, the endless fall may not mean a cliff. But symbolically, these images can point toward unresolved conflict, unspoken grief, or buried trauma. To ignore recurring nightmares is to ignore the messages of the unconscious. Painful though they are also maps. They show us where the wounds lie, even if we would rather not look. And yet, even as we interpret and analyze, we must not forget their sheer power. A recurring nightmare is not just information, it is an experience, visceral and consuming. To wake night after night in terror is to live with a shadow, a haunting that lingers even under the sun. The repetition itself is what makes it so devastating, transforming fear into something that feels eternal. And so we return to the paradox. Nightmares are tormentors, but they are also signals. They are destroyers of peace, but also reminders of what must be faced. In their repetition lies both their cruelty and their meaning. They will not stop until the mind is heard, until the wound is seen, until the fear is confronted. Recurring nightmares stand as one of the clearest demonstrations of how deeply fear shapes us. They remind us that the brain will not rest until it has wrestled with what it cannot accept. They show us that the terrors we try to outrun in waking life will always find us in the dark. And in this, there is both despair and possibility. Despair because the nightmare may feel inescapable. Possibility because its very persistence means there is something to be learned, something to be healed. The nightmare is relentless, yes, but perhaps it is relentless because what it reveals is important. In the end, recurring nightmares may be the most honest of dreams. They do not let us forget, they do not let us deny. They return again and again until we face what must be faced. And though the process is painful, perhaps there is a kind of grim mercy in it. For through the nightmare's persistence, the truth remains alive, waiting for us to be ready to confront it. Nightmares remind us of a truth that is both unsettling and profound. The mind is never entirely ours to command. We may direct our actions in the day, but in the night, the unconscious takes the stage. There, it speaks in images, in emotions, in shadows and whispers. And sometimes it chooses fear as its language. We have walked through many layers of this mystery. We have seen how nightmares arise from brain chemistry, shaped by the strange rhythms of REM sleep. We have seen how psychology explains them as echoes of trauma, anxiety, and unresolved conflict. We have looked at how culture paints them as omens, curses, and even divine messages. We have explored their role in evolution, their persistence in mental health, and their astonishing ability to fuel creativity. And yet, even after all this, the nightmare refuses to be fully explained. For every theory, there is another question. For every study, another mystery. Why does one person suffer from nightly terrors while another rests peacefully? Why does a specific fear repeat itself endlessly while countless others never appear? Why does the brain, which seeks balance, sometimes insist on torment? These questions remain, reminding us that the frontier of the mind is vast, and nightmares dwell in its deepest regions. What is clear is that nightmares hold power. They are not trivial. They shape memory, behavior, and health. They influence culture, art, and story. They are woven into the very fabric of being human. To ignore them is to ignore part of ourselves. To listen to them, however frightening, is to confront what lies beneath. In the end, perhaps nightmares serve as a mirror. They reflect back the fears we carry, whether personal, ancestral, or universal. They remind us of our fragility, our vulnerability, our inescapable relationship with fear, but they also remind us of resilience. Each nightmare survived is proof of endurance. Each night of terror that gives way to dawn is a testament to the mind's ability to endure what it creates. There is also a strange beauty in their very darkness. Nightmares are raw, unfiltered, stripped of pretense. They are the purest expressions of fear, and fear itself is a powerful teacher. Fear sharpens, warns, prepares. It keeps us alive. And while nightmares often push fear beyond what is necessary, they still reveal the depth of the brain's commitment to survival. Some people learn to use nightmares as guides. They record them, analyze them, draw meaning from them. Others learn to fight back within the dream itself, gaining lucidity and changing the narrative. Still others find that over time, recurring terrors lose their power, becoming familiar enough to no longer wound. In each case, the nightmare becomes more than torment. It becomes part of a dialogue between the conscious and unconscious, a conversation as old as humanity itself. As we reflect on nightmares, it is worth remembering that they are only one side of the story. For every nightmare, there are countless dreams of wonder, joy, and peace. The same mind that conjures monsters can also create beauty, love, and impossible adventure. Nightmares may be the dark half, but they exist within a larger whole. They are part of the spectrum of dreaming, which itself is part of the great mystery of sleep. And it is here that we return to the beginning. For all their terror, nightmares remind us that we are dreamers. To dream is to step into another realm each night, to explore landscapes of the mind that waking life cannot contain. Sleep, in all its forms, is not simply rest, but a journey. And though nightmares may be the storms of that journey, they are also proof that the voyage is real. So the next time you wake with your heart racing, shaken by images too vivid to forget, remember this. The nightmare is not only a curse, it is a message, a rehearsal, a creation, a mirror. It is the brain's way of speaking in its most primal tongue. It frightens, yes, but it also reveals. It unsettles, but it also connects us to our ancestors, to our culture, to one another. Nightmares will never vanish. They are part of what it means to be human, but perhaps we can learn to meet them not only with dread, but with curiosity. To ask, what are you showing me? What fear do you carry? What truth hides within your shadow? In doing so, we may find that the nightmare, though dark, can illuminate. And so, as we close this journey, let us remember. The mind is vast, the night is deep, and within sleep lies both terror and wonder. Nightmares are the guardians of that mystery, frightening but fascinating, painful but profound. And though they may shake us, they also remind us that even in darkness, the human spirit endures. Thank you for joining us here in Sleep Space. May your nights be peaceful, your dreams vivid, and should nightmares come, may you face them with courage, knowing they are part of the great story of the mind.